Welcome to the Leader to Leader podcast, sponsored by the StarQuest Group. I'm Tom Athenauer, your host, and today it's my pleasure to introduce you to my good friend and colleague, Ann Betz. Ann is a neuroscience and leadership expert, and I met Ann about 10 years ago when I was going through my executive coach training program. And not only was she a great facilitator instructor within the coaching space, but I was most fascinated by her research and graduate studies related to the intersection of leadership and coaching with neuroscience. And that was what sparked my interest. And we got to talking over the years, and I learned that she had been studying neuroscience for a number of years prior and actually had published numerous articles and had become an expert in her field. In addition to her consulting work today, she is the lead author of a book entitled Integration: The Power of Being Coactive in Work and Life, and has published numerous articles on the subject of neuroscience and coaching. In addition to being a leading expert in this field, she is a published poet and is actually quite proud to say that she uses her understanding of the brain and consciousness to bring to life the wonders of the human soul. Today, we're going to unpack what we as leaders need to learn and know about neuroscience so that we can be more effective in how we're leading others, helping them deal with stress, helping ourselves deal with stress and all the uncertainty that's going out there in the marketplace. And so I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. So let's jump in and talk with Ann. Welcome, Ann. Great to have you.
Hey, Tom, it's awesome to be here. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. It has been a while, so it's great to reconnect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you have, I've just been so fascinated with your work in the whole neuroscience and leadership and coaching and where that's going. It's sort of that frontier. And for our listeners out there, they've heard about neuroscience, and it's probably created more questions like, what is it and why should it matter? Can you just kind of give us a little bit of a very understandable way to unpack this thing called neuroscience, and why should we as leaders care?
Why should we care? Which is probably the more important question. Well,
it is, yeah.
It's fundamentally, neuroscience, brain science. It's the science of the brain in the most, the simplest view of the word. When I think about it, I think about this, the brain is part of a complicated human system. And we can't actually talk about it completely in isolation because our bodies have a role to play. Our whole central nervous system has a role to play. We are complex systems, and a big part of it is the brain. So strictly speaking, neuroscience would deal with this part. But when I think about neuroscience of leadership, and really the way I like to think about it is not just the theoretical academic neuroscience, but applied. What is this telling us about how we want to manage people? What is this telling us about how we work with our own emotions, with our own decisions, things like that? That's the application. And so I am particularly interested in the aspects of neuroscience that can be applied to human development, including leadership, including coaching, all of that, but a broader case of how does this help human beings would be what I scan for as I'm looking at neuroscience.
So is it an extension of psychology, or is social science? Where does it fit within the whole area? I'm just curious around how it fits into the big.
It's now you're making me kind of draw back to my history of neuroscience memory, which I'm not sure how good it is at this point.
That's okay. It's what we know anyway, so go for it.
It probably originally, if I try to remember, was originally linked with psychology. But part of what enabled neuroscience to become its own field. And so neuroscience became a standalone field, separate from other fields, defined as a field in 1964. And at the University of California, Irvine, I believe they started their own department of neuroscience, and then Harvard followed, I think, the next year. And part of what enabled it to be a different kind of science than social science or psychology is technology. And so in about 1996, so we started the field in 1964. I'm not actually remembering exactly what the technology they had. A lot of what they were doing was things like, okay, if we know this person had a stroke, what are they not, and we can see where the stroke maybe was in their brain, what are they no longer able to do, that kind of research. Then in about 1996 we got sort of what you often hear about in neuroscience. We got functional magnetic resonance imaging, so MRI for your brain.
Yeah.
And then they were able to track blood flow, and that became really like, wow, we can see a lot more of what's actually going on. So that's only less than 30 years old, and the whole field is like 60 years old. So it's a young field on its own. And I think it started entering kind of what I call the popular imagination about 15 years ago or so,
Okay.
where we started seeing more articles about neuroscience as it related to leadership and not just mental issues like Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that, but they were actually looking at, well, how does a neurotypical brain operate? That's only, I want to say, a conversation that's been about 15 years or
Okay.
so.
Okay. That's fascinating.
Roughly.
And so the what was it? FMR?
FMR, it's written with a small f. It's
Yes, it's a small
functional,
F. Yes, I
small
remember
f,
that.
functional magnetic resonance imaging. And what it's looking at, I believe, is iron in the blood. It's tracing blood flow.
Okay.
So when you say, oh, well, this part of the brain lights up, when you do that, what we're seeing is more blood flow there.
Okay, got it. Because I remember seeing some of those FRMI, whatever it was.
fMRIs, yeah,
Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
good.
Where they were actually measuring sort of the imagery of brains that with people that were had physical pain, and it lit up the same areas then as well as those that were maybe shamed or
Yes.
criticized, or it was in
Yeah.
relationship to feedback. And I found that to be so fascinating of the science of what really goes on physiologically.
That was groundbreaking research. And it'll come to me the name of the researcher, somebody I really respect. And it was a husband and wife team. And they did this research uh project where they pretended, they called it cyberball. And so you were playing ball with a computer. You were told you were playing ball with two other people. It was really, I think, just with a computer. And at one point the two people stopped passing you the ball, even though this wasn't even real. It was on a computer. And they looked, and what they found is that areas of the person's brain who was being excluded were very, very close to the pain centers. That social exclusion, they weren't even being told they were worthless or anything. They just stopped throwing the ball to them. And it caused, in their view, social pain. Naomi Eisenberg, I think, is one of the
Oh,
researchers. And interestingly, I think part of where they went with that project is they actually discovered that taking something like Tylenol, if you feel like your heart is broken, you've been rejected, like romantic rejection, for example, or maybe you
yeah.
got rejected from your job or fired, they
Yeah.
found that if you take Tylenol, it makes you feel better because those social rejection areas are so right up against pain centers.
Wow. That's fascinating. That's
Fascinating.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we got to get back to this applied
Yes.
neuroscience because I think that our listeners are really most interested in why should I even
Now, what you asked me that, like, why should leaders care
yeah.
about this?
Yeah, what do I do with it? At least some base level simplistic knowledge around what it is, and then what's the application? And maybe we start
Right.
there. Kind of why does it matter?
Right. And so what I would say is it's like I'm looking for a good metaphor. Maybe you can think of one, Tom, but it's like any area of expertise it isn't just one thing. So there are multiple. So think about a metaphor for this as I'm talking. So
Okay.
when you say, why does neuroscience matter? I would probably say, well, what aspects of neuroscience matter? Because, for example, there's tons of research on how to prevent dementia. That may not be as relevant for a manager, in a Fortune 500 company, right? Might be personally sort of interesting. So when I look at this, I think, well, what aspects? And there are some big ones. So, for example, understanding the brain's response to stress is super helpful for every manager or leader, for themselves and also for their team and direct reports, to be able to identify what's going on here, and given what's going on, what is the intervention?
Yes.
Because here's the difference. So if what's happening is that the person is actually becoming less effective because they're having an influx of stress,
Okay.
right? And so for example, I'm thinking about somebody I'm coaching who has a problem with their assistant is not very good at attention to detail. But what we've realized as we're working on this is it's not that she's not good at attention to detail, it's that she's under a huge amount of stress with her family. She's got like a couple of kids that are out of control, not a very supportive husband. And it's not really her capacity for attention to detail. It's the impact of stress that's taking her brain offline. And so, if we just work on, okay, you got to get better at detail, we're sort of missing the actual problem. And that it's far better for the person that I'm coaching, to work with her on ways to manage her stress so she can come back to her natural gifts and abilities. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. I'm still trying to think of a metaphor, and I haven't got one yet. But
Okay.
I think that the situation that you've mapped out is very real. I mean, it may not be the executive admin who's having this, but it may be somebody on your team that's not pulling their weight,
Right.
or somebody is a peer that is just, you're just in this constant tension, and yet you can't figure out why you can't focus, or why you're not as productive, or why you're so exhausted. I mean,
Right.
out the scenario, but it's alive and well out there for many.
Absolutely. And for me, one of the cues that it's maybe not it's not a performance thing often in the way we tend to think about performance, but it might be a stress response, is if it's a different, like it's sort of like all of a sudden, like this person who's been super reliable, productive, like never a problem, like now they're not performing as well. That to me is a little bit of a flag that maybe at least something to check out, is to find out what's happening in terms of the stress in their life, because it may not be a performance issue. It may be a stress issue, particularly if it's not typical for them.
Yes, right,
Right.
right.
Or, for my clients, and I work as an executive coach, my biggest trigger for this, trigger in a good way, is if my clients come in and they say something to me, Tom, like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Everyone's irritating me. I can't stand anybody right now. I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't seem to focus. I don't know what's wrong with me. My memory seems to be going. Am I getting early onset dementia? Maybe, but probably more likely is you're telling me all of these things are a natural response to an overload of stress, or, interestingly enough, not enough stimulation. So you get the same response in the brain. They call it the Goldilocks zone. You get the same capacity response if you are underutilized, bored, your work has no relevance. You can't see why, you're just doing it because somebody told you to do it, but you don't really care. Well, what's happening is it's a neurotransmitter issue. So you are either under resourced, like you don't have enough chemicals in your brain to make the connections that you need. It's like you're dry,
Yeah.
right? Or you're oversaturated and you're flooded. And so the connections can't be made because there's too much in the way.
Okay.
And you get the same response. So sometimes, and I'm thinking about a client that one of my students had, who was like just sort of on a slope to underperformance, and the manager, what who was her client, was just assuming that this person was way overloaded. But
Yes.
but to his credit, he asked. He said, "So tell me what's going on." He found out person was not overloaded at all. They were bored. They didn't see where they were going in the career. They didn't have anything that made them excited to go to work. And that was having an impact. Really, I like to say it has an impact on your functional intelligence. If you're bored or if you're overwhelmed, both of those compromise basically your intelligence and your ability to think creatively, to think in abstractions rather than black and white, things like that. So my advice to leaders is don't assume that it's always an overload of stress. It might be that the person is not fully utilized and they're bored, but things are kind of slipping off their plate. So you think, oh, they must have too much on their plate. But the truth is they need more challenge. Tom, have you ever run into that with somebody
Oh,
you've worked with?
yeah, I'm just thinking of this scenarios where the natural sort of response from most leaders is to say, I'm giving too much work to them. In fact, we hear that. And then the leaders feeling bad about that, feeling like they're loading them up too much because they're overstressed. And so then the leader takes back the work and taking on more responsibility. We call it the monkeys on the back. Last speaker I had talked about these monkeys, when in reality, that may not be the case. And that's what you're talking about, that
Exactly.
behaviors may be driven by something else other than overstressed.
Well, and one of the best ways to understand this is I had a student who he like we were talking about this and you could just see his eyes getting bigger and bigger. He was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh my God. And this is not a workplace example, but I think it really nails it. His son was in school, and I believe he was like in second or third grade, and he was not doing well in math. But they knew this kid was really smart. And so they said to the school, I think something's going on here because he's really smart. And they were like, everybody thinks their kid is special. And to my student's credit, he said, yeah, yeah, whatever. And he went and got him tested. The kid was capable of math at a 10th grade level. He
Wow.
was bored. And so he wasn't doing fractions and the difference is he wasn't just being, disruptive. It wasn't a choice. It was like it wasn't interesting enough for his brain to be able to make the connections. So they put him way ahead in math and he was like getting A's.
Yep. Fascinating. That is a
I
great
know.
example.
It explained to me because I was one of those students who was either an A or a D. And I could never quite figure it out until I had this. And I thought, oh, I'm sorry, I spent much of my high school bored out of my mind.
Yeah.
And so I just couldn't, it wasn't that I didn't want to do the work, it's that I didn't have the neurotransmitters to do the work.
Yes. Yes.
And that's a difference. It's not like a willful thing, it's a biochemical thing.
That's so fascinating. We talk a lot in the leadership work that we do is, great leaders grow other great leaders. Well, what does that actually mean? It means that you as a leader, really a key responsibility is how do you develop your team members? How do you really challenge people and see? I was listening to a podcast with Coach K out of Duke, and he talked about how he had always had higher expectations of the players that they had than having themselves. And so there was this constant
Right.
sort of expectation of being just a little bit higher on it, and it kept them engaged and fully motivated. And I think that we're talking about that same thing being played out here, but from the science side of it, that there's physiology that's going on.
Yeah, and I find that takes the shame out of it.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
people can understand, like like my clients when they come to me like, I don't know what's wrong with me. And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, I have a hypothesis that you are having a, this is my language. I have a hypothesis that you are having a basically neurotypical response to stress. You are not a bad person. Tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about a amazing leader that I had. She was COO of an international nonprofit, and she was one of the people that came in. It's like, I don't know what's going on. I'm having a lot of trouble focusing. I don't seem to have empathy for anybody in my organization. And so we did a little deeper dive into what was happening. She had gotten so good at her job, it was not a challenge for her anymore. And she was, really efficient and she was bored.
Yeah.
She's just bored.
I can see
And
it.
there wasn't a lot she could do in her job. It was a founder-led company. There wasn't room for her to become the CEO. So she started just taking classes and doing stuff outside. And eventually she quit and started a different career because she just desperately needed a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so fascinating. So as leaders out there, I think one of the things that I'm taking from this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when we see a lack of motivation, or maybe the behaviors are a little bit off from what they normally might be, kind of inconsistent with maybe
Yeah.
what you've observed previously, or you have some concern, or you might be curious about what's really going on in the individual. We have to engage. We have to find out. So what's really going on? I've noticed this, or I've seen this happen, and that just seems a little unusual. What's going on? And so to spend a little bit of the time, because it may not be overly stressed, it could be under stressed. Is what?
Right. And it very often, certainly as I share this and I do and I teach this in lots of organizations and things like that,
Yeah.
it is probably more common that it is too much stress, right? That's probably a more common thing
Yes.
there.
Meaning there's too much stress. That's the most common one. Yes.
That's probably,
Yeah.
75% of the
Estimates.
time or
Yeah.
so. But doing some exploration, and one of the really interesting things is if you do that in just in the way that you said, with using some coach-like skills as a leader, and go in and just say, tell me here's what I'm noticing. Tell me what's going on, and bring empathy. That in and of itself tends to diminish the stress for the other person. It might be all they need is somebody to just say, I'm aware, like right now we're in a crunch. You've got a lot going on. Tell me how it feels. 5 minutes, that actually could be in and of itself a reset for that person because maybe all they needed was somebody to care.
And so is that what happens then? Because we talk about empathy as being the quickest way, that practice of that behavior, that skill, capability, you can get somebody to calm down. Is it that the nervous system is calming down? Does empathy drive that? Is that why you can
Connection.
refocus? You know?
Yeah, I mean, so the research on sort of what you do about stress is pretty good because this gets researched a lot because stress is a real concern.
Yes.
But probably the number one thing, and I have to say, women are more socialized for this than men. This is not an inherent uh, genetic thing. It's social. It's, I think, almost completely socialization. Women get socialized under stress to reach out to each other. And reaching out to someone, just like your work bestie or whoever is one of it's like what you're doing is you're asking, even though you're not saying this, unless you're me and you're a little weird, but they're helping regulate your nervous system,
Oh, fascinating.
right? And that is a place where women can have an advantage through socialization, and men are more socialized to kind of tough it out.
Oh, absolutely. Go inward, right?
Yep.
We'll just grind it out, right? You
Which,
know?
and going inward just means you're going into rumination and probably not a very productive place
Right.
inward.
Right.
But one of the best ways to regulate your stress is just tell somebody how you feel and have them, have it be a person who actually listens to you. This is why, Tom, and you're a coach, I think about how often my clients, it's just happened today with a coaching client earlier. She said, I feel so much better. I feel lighter talking to you.
Just talking it through, just kind of
Talking to you.
verbalizing it. Yeah, putting it
Yep.
up.
And
Yeah.
being heard.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's using our powers of reflection, like here's what I'm hearing, like that. But I didn't have to do a lot of fancy things. She just really needed somebody to hear her. Uh, and I'm just always struck by that power
Yeah.
of that. But
Yeah.
the other thing, so I think what this fits with is um, first of all, there is a benefit, just relationship tends to calm stress down, positive relationship. But then if you look at the research on, sort of interventions for stress, and I always say these in order of effectiveness, the
Okay.
first thing that people generally try to do is they try to suppress it. Like, I'm fine. Nope, I'm fine. It's all good. I hate this. I, I'm like, my clients learn not to say to me, it's all good, because usually when people are saying it's all good, it's not.
Yep, got it. I can relate to
Really? Totally. So,
that.
I mean, I understand that that's a way of trying to say, like, I'm going to be okay. Like,
Yeah.
that's okay. But so you don't want to suppress, because that has negative impact on you. And it also has a negative impact on the people around you. People can feel when you're suppressing something. And the research actually shows that when you suppress an emotion, your blood pressure goes up. And the people who, like, if you're in a meeting, got people on either side of you, it's very likely the people who are sitting closest to you, that their blood pressure will go up too as
Oh,
you're
that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
you
Yeah.
do not want to suppress. So what the first thing you can do is just name how you're feeling. And again, that's that, listener, that caring listener. And I just think about, even in the workplace, if you've got somebody who can listen to you and just say, I just need you to hear this. I got to go to a meeting. I got 2 minutes, but I'm so angry right now, or I'm just so lost right now, or whatever it is. Even that has been shown that that can help.
Wow. Wow.
The next thing that really helps in terms of managing stress, this is about reducing it, is this one's real obvious, but we call it controlling the environment, changing what you can change. So I think about my classic example for this is if you have a long commute to work, and you get to work and you get to work and you're in a bad mood, you get home and you're in a bad mood. One of the things you can do is look to see, is there another way you can do it? Can you go at a time the traffic isn't as heavy? Can you work from home? All of that, that's controlling the environment. Maybe you've got somebody that you're working with on a team, who's just not very easy to work with, negative, throws you under the bus, stuff like that. One of the ways of controlling the environment is, can you not be on a team with them? Like,
Right.
that works really well, but we can't always control things.
Yes.
So that's a problem with it. It's like, if you could just control, I like to say, for some people, this is the only strategy they had. And my mother was one of them. Every time she got stressed, it was all about what could she, control. And it made all of us like, who were being controlled, didn't work for us. So it's a strategy, but you got to have other strategies, because there are things you can't control.
Okay.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. But there's a sense of sort of calming down again, as we're talking about calming down the nervous system by feeling like you have some sense of control around something.
Yeah, because the
That's what you.
best way to stress someone out is take away their control.
Okay. Okay.
This
Yes.
is why, like in mergers and acquisitions and things like that, it is far better to give people as much information as you legally and ethically and strategically can. Give them things, or if you're doing, like, the question I would have as a leader is, where can I give them choice? Where can I give them control? And you can't always give them control over everything, and you can't always give people all the information. But if you cue yourself to, let me try to default to as much as I can, you will have a better time with big changes. And that's probably intuitively, I mean, I imagine you've seen that as you've
Most definitely. Definitely.
worked with
And like
people.
the changing of the work environment, that's something that just even going down to a coffee shop, or getting into a different work environment, or go outside for a walk, or taking a break, or whatever it is where you have some control over that, I could see where that calms the system down.
Absolutely. And they've even found things like there's a couple of really interesting examples. In nursing homes, you give people even a plant to take care of.
Yes.
It reduces their stress. And I just saw the most beautiful little video. I'm a big cat lover. There's one of mine back there. And they gave cats to people in prison. And it transformed the prison environment, because they had to be on good behavior to keep their cat.
Yeah.
And they had a place where they had like efficacy around this animal, and it was magical in terms of the results. And they were worried that these terrible big, burly guys were going to hurt the cats. Are
Yeah.
you kidding? They were like knitting them little sweaters. I'm like, I'm all for cats in prison.
That is a great example of it. But we know that, right? Even with, I've read a couple of aging books as my parents, they have since passed, but the aging part of that, how people, they prune away some of that control and that's problematic.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
was there another, you had
Yeah, there's a
support
couple
and a
more.
control. Yeah,
Let
let's
me
hit some
real
more here.
quick.
These are good.
So control works where you can. The next best thing is values and meaning. And being able to, what they found is when people are stressed out, if they can reflect on the bigger purpose, the meaning, what's really important here, those big picture questions, that often also reduces stress. And here's the mechanism. Here's what's really interesting. That's why I just find this so fascinating. And for anybody who's listening, who's like in manufacturing or who deals with, processes, it's like that for the brain. It's like there's a process. And if you can understand it, it's like if you can understand the manufacturing process and something breaks, you know where to go to fix it. But if you've got somebody who does not understand the whole process, they're just lost. They have no idea. So when you ask me why this matters, it's like, why does it matter to you to understand the manufacturing process? It's the same. It's like, I need to understand the mental process because then I know where to go. So here's what's happening in the brain. So if you're really upset about something, Tom, and I ask you, well, tell me, so this thing that just happened maybe in a meeting, maybe somebody, just took your work and trashed it, for example, and we're talking and you're not happy about that. And I say, well, tell me what values or what's really important to you that you feel got stepped on there.
Great
What
question.
I'm requiring you to do is I'm requiring you not to just verbally, vent. I'm requiring you to think. You have to actually, and you'll see if you ask a question like that, you'll see people go like that, right? Or look up or something that indicates they're thinking. When we do that, what the brain starts to produce is a neurotransmitter called GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid,
I've
GAB.
heard of it. Yes. I
Yeah,
probably
and you
heard
can
about it through you. Yeah. Okay.
maybe, and you can
Yeah.
actually take GABA and you can get some it's actually one of my go-tos if I have a disruptive, upsetting, stressful thing. You can take GABA and generally things don't, there's something called the blood-brain barrier where we don't get things in our brain, but a little bit of GABA will cross that. And honestly, you can buy a bottle of it at your local vitamin store. And if you're feeling really stressed, it does help calm down. It can help you sleep as well.
Okay. Okay.
But
Interesting.
what the brain does when I make you think about something like that, it actually releases GABA so you can think. And that's why the question works. So anything that requires the person to kind of take a pause, you tend to get this. And it's if for those who are in, North America, we grew up with Pepto-Bismol. Remember that?
Yep. Yep.
So it coats, it soothes, it protects. GABA is like Pepto-Bismol in the brain. It's a inhibitory neurotransmitter. It calms things down. And so, what I want to do in a stress mode for myself or anybody else is I want to help their brain calm down so they can find a way forward.
Yeah.
So, asking about values does that. The other thing that does that really well is working with them on looking at it from a different perspective. And that might be a question like, okay, really get that, this is not making you happy. What's the big picture here? And it could be the big picture is, this happens in every meeting. I don't think I want to, consult with these people anymore. Like, honestly, or it could be, the big picture is, I don't really care about that because the project's moving forward and that's just a person who's got issues. And that kind of also helps you go into more of a reflective mode where again, you get that calming place.
So
Yeah.
language like phrasing like let's zoom out on this
Mhm.
and get a bigger perspective on
Yep.
it. Or how could we look at it through a different lens? Or
Yeah.
just the shift of that can help calm things down just from a physiological perspective with the GABA and kind of
Yep.
the coding, if
Absolutely.
you will, is what you're talking about. That
Yeah.
shifts that. That
The research shows shifting perspectives is one of the best things you can do to calm down stress. And in fact, one of my teachers said to me at one point in class, said, if I could teach a human being one skill for really managing life, it would be the ability to take a different perspective. It's one of the best skills there really is for that. And I think sometimes that, let's zoom out. What's the 360-degree view? What if we stood in our customer's shoes?
great question. Yep.
That I'm trying to think of other kind of leadership related questions.
You could look at it from a standpoint of internal versus, kind of sales and operations. Okay, let's look at it from the sales perspective. What's, kind of look at it through their lens. I mean, just even functional jobs. You could you
Absolutely.
could you could phrase it up like that.
Absolutely. And I think, we were talking before we started about, stuff's getting done in teams more and more and
Yes.
cross-functional teams. And I have seen this in my consulting that we can get into characterizations about the other group,
Yeah,
like, oh my
absolutely.
God, I have to work with accounting and they're so rigid and, like that.
Right, right.
And the capacity to say, let me, as a thought experiment, imagine that I am that person. How would they see this? You don't have to stay there. You don't have to even make decisions from there. But could you stand there and look at it? Because that's most likely going to activate empathy, which is a critical, I know you've talked about that before, but
Yes.
critical factor in leadership.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
and the number one, probably best thing you can do for stress is mindfulness. And it doesn't have to be closed-eyed mindfulness. Although that I think what we see in the research is that people who do have like a meditation practice tend to be less reactive. They tend to be able to manage their internal state better. It's one of the biggest benefits of this for a leader. But you don't have to do that. It's anything in the moment that brings you to present time. So I have folks that are going into stressful situations think about what can they do that activates one or more of their five senses. So it's about, this is very common. It's really like, I think there's like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's five things I can see. What are four things I can hear? Three things I can touch. One, what's the taste in my mouth? Even any of that. But what that is doing is it's activating the part of your brain that's oriented toward present time. And when that part of the brain gets activated, it actually shuts down the emotional part of the brain that's upset. So it's kind of like one or the other. I can either be in an emotional response or I can be present in this moment. We're not designed to do both at the same time. So if I can just bring myself back right here, right now, maybe I'm just even feeling the texture of my sweater, or I'm in a meeting and I'm getting upset. And so I focus on the texture of my pants or rubbing my fingers together or even playing with a ring or something like that. The idea is present time awareness tends to help with that, as well as breathing. And one of the best little hacks that I have
Yes. Uh-huh.
is breathe out longer than you breathe in.
Yeah.
If you remember one thing from this whole thing, when you are stressed and upset, breathe out longer than you breathe in. I don't care what your count is, it doesn't matter, but that tells your brain we're safe. Because if you are in a stressful situation, like you're driving in a snowstorm or something like that, and you get home, like you get to your garage,
Yep.
I know you live in Colorado, so the snow can be
Right.
pretty intense,
Right.
right? You pull into your garage, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go, right? Like that
Yes.
relief.
Yes.
And what is happening is you're telling yourself we're okay. And so you can hack that. You can just tell yourself you're okay, no matter in any situation, by just long breath out. And it'll activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So we have the sympathetic nervous system that gets ramped up under stress. I like to say the sympathetic nervous system is sympathetic to your stress. And then there's the parasympathetic, which balances that out. And I say that's your paramedics. And whenever you're stressed, you want to activate the paramedics. One of the best ways to call them in is breathe, breathe out, because then they're saying, oh, we're safe. So we're good. Not it's and it's unfortunately not an immediate fix, but what you'll start to notice is after, I don't even know timing. Usually for me, it's like I've done it. I'm thinking, why don't I feel better? And then 10 minutes later, I'm like, oh, I actually do feel better.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And so it's interesting. The other night I couldn't sleep. It was like 2 in the afternoon. So why do you wake up in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., and you can't go back to sleep and you're ruminating. I went on my Peloton app and pulled up a meditation. I thought I'd be the only one there. There were like 75 people from America on
you
this
just got a
app at two
club.
in the morning, and they weren't people in Australia or different time zones. So I'm just curious that we're gonna if I could go off road for just a second.
Oh, sure,
Why is it such a
absolutely.
big? I mean, why can you not seem to get hold of it at 2 a.m.? You
Well,
just ruminate.
I
What's
don't know the total answer to this, but I do know every organ in the body kind of has its own circadian rhythm. And I don't know all of them. At one point, I had a whole chart that said, like, during this time,
yeah,
and in the middle of the night is when the amygdala, which it's not this gets complicated because the brain is system,
yeah,
but the amygdala, part of its job is to evaluate threat. And it is sort of its time is the middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning. And I think the reason evolutionarily for this is that's when we're most vulnerable. We're in deep sleep. So, if the lions come by and you're not able to be awake, you could get eaten. And so that's why I think sometimes we wake up at that time because we're just a little more attuned to what might be a threat
right out there.
outside of us.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, yeah,
And then we go into this place of rumination. And so we have these two different networks, two different teams in our brain.
yeah.
There's actually a whole bunch of different teams, just like in an organization, but we'll just focus on two for now. One of them is this present time focus. And it's actually one of the terms it's known by is the task network
Yes.
because and it's part of what gives us actually flow and the feeling of being, really like in the zone, you could say. But it's the network that's activated when we're right here in present time, which is often the case. Like I like to, like if I'm writing something or I'm doing a PowerPoint or something, I'm totally in that. I'm right here. I'm working with what's right in front of me. And it's where you lose track of time because you're just so in the present moment. That's why it actually feels so good. And that's why it's dangerous to start a really engaging project when you've got like a Zoom meeting in 10 minutes
Right,
because
right, right, right.
you're like, wait, where did the time go? Set an alarm. And it's also why I think for me, like if I have to do something like that, I need a broader chunk of time because it can really get into this and it feels great. So that network.
But it can also get disrupted. So to your point about jumping on a Zoom call in 10 minutes, you get into this flow quick. It's very disruptive. It's why it takes you when you have to stop and start so many times, it takes you forever to get through it.
Yeah, which
Better off
is
carving out some time.
Yeah, it's much better to try not to try to do that really complicated task in
Yeah,
10-minute chunks.
yeah,
Find the 2 hours where you've got some time going in and some time coming out.
yeah,
But
yeah,
the opposite network to this is it's the mind wandering network. It's
yeah.
actually called the default mode network. And I love both of these networks. The default mode network is also where we find motivation and purpose and meaning, where we understand ourselves and each other. But it's our minds are not focused, they're wandering. And the downside of this is that you can wander around. Ooh, what would be possible? What if we launched that product and people really loved it? And you can do that. Or you can go, why did I say that thing in the meeting? Everybody thinks I'm an idiot. Right.
Right,
Right.
right, right.
And the problem is, I think with back to the 2 in the morning, I think that's such an interesting story that everyone's on the app.
It was comforting, I guess, to know I
I
wouldn't be
guess
covered, right?
you got a club,
You know?
but the problem during the day, we more naturally balance and we can, more notice like, okay, well, let me just get back to work. And so we're balancing those. In the middle of the night, there's nothing to do. So there's nothing for your brain to do other than catastrophize. So one of the pieces of advice, I have two things that I know really work for that. One is find like I actually think things like sleep, not even a meditation, but a sleep story, something that you can focus on, or a meditation if that works. Anything like that that calls your brain back from its rumination and gives it something else to pay attention to, or get up, get out of bed, and write a to-do list.
That also works too. And
That
it
works
just,
too.
it's like downloading it. Yeah.
Yep. Get it out of here.
Yeah.
Take a look at it on paper. It's not so bad. It's going to be okay. But I was telling you before we started, I spent some time in the hospital this fall. And if you've ever been in the hospital for any sort of extended period of time, and I was in for a couple of weeks at a time, it
Yeah.
is not a very good place to get sleep. I
No.
don't know if you've noticed this, but it's so bad.
No, it's
And
not
there,
good at all. A
no, and I'm just
lot of
like,
stuff going on.
sleep is healing. Why are you taking my temperature? But I would often, because of all the disruption and just because of my own worry about my health stuff and that I was going through, I
Yeah.
would often wake up at 3 in the morning, couldn't get back to sleep. And knowing, oh my God, somebody's going to be coming in 2 hours to take my blood, it's just not good. But what I did is I had queued up a whole bunch of sleep stories and I learned just put the sleep story on, listen to that, and I would almost always get back to sleep. I think there was only one or two times that I made it all the way to the end of a sleep story. So that worked pretty well. Just give my brain something else to focus on.
This is so fascinating. I mean, I jotted down about five or six, we call them hacks, to
Yeah, little brain hacks.
yeah,
Yeah.
suppressing and controlling the environment. These are really good ones that you've noted down here. One of the things that, and we'll kind of wrap up here really quick, but one of the things that we've been seeing is with some of this additional stress, the leadership behaviors, we're seeing more reactivity, meaning
Mhm.
people are falling what we would call below the line, into
Yeah.
those reactive tendencies, either over
Right.
control or overly complying, pleasing, or that protecting side of things. What's really going on there? I mean, is it really as the brain is the neuroscience indicate that just it's the stress levels, it's the sort of all the stuff going on, and we just go back to what we know, or do we go off,
Yeah.
or what is it that
Mean,
happens?
basically, I think so. So I like to think of prime directive of the brain, or one of the main. And I think as we start to understand ourselves more as complicated beings who have, practical, spiritual, all of that, we'll
Yeah.
learn. But one of the main things that the brain needs to do is keep the body alive. And one of the best ways to do that is conserve resources because you never know what you're going to need. And one of the best ways to conserve resources is do the thing that is more automatic. So all of our behaviors. So think about this. I love to tell this story. So my son, who's now like 29 this spring, he's almost 30. Oh my God. Uh, when he was 18, I taught him how to drive. And I remember the first time that we're in the car and he's sitting in the car, hands on the steering wheel. And he looks over at me and he says, don't talk to me about anything that's not driving.
Uh,
He was a very empowered child. Uh,
yes.
so I was like, okay, mission received because he hadn't automated it yet.
Yes. That makes
Right.
sense. Mhm.
And he's like, it was taking a ton of conscious. I mean, I remember on that same trip, he looks at me and he says, "At what point when we're coming up to a stop sign do I put my foot on the brake?" I was like, Tom, I was like, I don't know how to answer that. I don't know. When it feels right, he's like, Mom, that's not helpful.
And in his mind, he's trying to break that competency down into the little steps, which requires a lot of
Absolutely.
energy, right?
And it's taking all of this cognitive energy, which
Yeah.
basically your brain runs on glucose.
Yes.
So it is like, if I think about fueling a car, glucose for the brain, gas for
Yeah.
the car, speaking of cars, it is draining the glucose in both of us because I'm also paying if you've have you ever taught a child to drive? I
Yes.
hope I never have to do that again. It is probably and I had a brand new car. It is probably the most stressful thing I've ever done in my life. And he was a careful driver, but it's all my glucose. We get home, we're just exhausted.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
this is actually why people say sometimes I need a drink.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
it's actually alcohol. Alcohol is will deliver glucose to your brain as well as other things that are can be relaxing. But part of it is honestly, you're actually getting some of that sugar back, funnily enough.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, okay. So all those studies that came out in the last, what, 5, 6 months, we could just throw those out.
Oh, the ones that say alcohol is really bad for you.
Yeah, you can't even have any of it now. We've went from five
Well,
drinks now to zero. So,
and I'll come back to the reactivity, but what I will tell you is, you and I, share a profession, and I have done a lot of training, and I used to do training in person, full days or four
yeah.
days in a
Yes.
row.
Yeah.
And, by the end of the day, my business partner and I would look at each other and be like, we need a glass of wine. And what I kind of realized as we were looking at this was it's not wine that I need, it's sugar that I need.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's interesting.
And
Yeah.
so one of the changes that I made is I realized I was operating during the day on adrenaline, right? That
It's
adrenaline you get, you're in a
interesting. Yeah.
group, and
Yeah.
lunch would come and I'd be talking and I'd eat, I wouldn't eat enough. And so I started eating more protein during the day because protein gives you a long, slow, protein and fat, other than not carbohydrates and sugar, give you a long, slow delivery to the brain. And at the end of the day, I would eat nuts as a snack. I would do all of these things to fuel myself. And at the end of the day, I stopped craving wine.
Well, that's
Now, I still,
interesting.
do
That's,
like a glass of wine on occasion, but
yeah.
this kind of
Yeah.
feeling like, where's the wine bottle? That kind of went away because it really wasn't about that. It was about I was depleted.
Yes. That makes total sense. Get that. That makes really good sense. Yeah.
So I
That's
think
fascinating.
for leaders, thinking about this is where I think about, there's a term that we need a different term for because it's sort of gotten like people don't like it, but self-care, right?
Right. Right.
Yes. Oh, self-care, go take a bath. But really, self-care is, if you're being more reactive, eat lunch. Eat a good, healthy lunch, not because it's morally right, but because your brain needs a long, slow delivery of glucose, and everything will convert to glucose eventually. But sugar, alcohol, think carbohydrates convert more quickly and dissipate more quickly.
I see. Yeah.
So finding a way to get that long, slow delivery gives you more emotional control.
So fascinating.
Interesting, right?
This is really interesting. We have this in the leadership work that we do, particularly in the journey program. We talk about that leaders bring the weather. Okay, so I think Jim Geiger, that's
It
where
was
it
like a
originated
Harvard
from.
Business Review
Yeah,
article,
it was
but
something
yeah,
like that. But I think this is really what we're talking about. That we great. It's a great metaphor, but there's some science behind that. We do bring the weather, how we
yeah,
show up, how we sort of because emotions are contagious. We know that, and we have a huge effect on how people experience not only their work life but their day. And I think it's a really important thing to think
absolutely.
about. You know?
and and what we model, what we
Yeah.
model as leaders. And I always think about, I don't really have a neuroscience explanation, maybe we could think of one, but my first real job, I was pregnant when they hired me, and then I was a young mom.
Yeah.
And my boss at the time, his wife was also pregnant, and she told him, I love her for this, she told him, I will only have a second child if you come home at 5 o'clock every day, and you are not allowed to bring work home, and otherwise, we are not having two children. And he said, to his credit, he agreed, and he was very good about it. As a young person in her first professional job, I was a manager, that modeling made it possible for me to leave at 5 and for me to make my give my family appropriate priority. And I still worked really hard, but I'm so grateful for that because it meant that as a young mom, um, I had such a better experience, and my child did as well. Less stress in the house
Yeah.
because I could leave at 5 o'clock every day.
That's a really tangible example of what you mean by bringing the weather. It's like it's
Yeah.
modeling what you're trying to really instill values or whatever it is that you think is most important so that others pick up on that. Beautiful. And this has been fantastic. I can't thank you enough for spending time sharing some thoughts, wisdom, ideas, best practices. This has been fascinating. I could go on for hours,
My
but
pleasure.
but
My
your cats
absolute pleasure.
need dinner, and so I'm going to
Yeah.
let you go. Thank you so
For
much.
having
It's
me.
been
My
fabulous.
pleasure.
Okay, take care now. Bye bye. All right, that is a wrap for this episode. And a big thank you goes out to Ann for sharing her research, her knowledge, wisdom, understanding, insights around how we all can integrate more neuroscience into our leadership on a day-to-day basis. Given this attention on applied neuroscience, which basically she talked about how do we learn from neuroscience and apply it to what we do as leaders out there in our work environments, I did jot down 5 areas that I thought were particularly relevant. And they had to do with how do we manage some of the stress, the tensions, the conflicts that we all deal with on a day to day basis. And how do we do it and take care of ourselves while also being better able to take care of others? And so there were 5 hacks that she talked about. Hack number 1, don't suppress your emotions. They just, by burying them, you just put them underneath the ground and they don't go away. And what happens oftentimes with negative emotions is they sit there and then they come out in ways that would not be advantageous to you. So, one of the ways that she recommended that we handle that is to be able to reach out and share sort of how we're feeling with other people. And don't be afraid to name it and kind of bring it to the forefront, saying, "Hey, I'm experiencing this situation this way, and I'm frustrated, or I'm angry about this. Help me process this. Help me get a kind of a, am I reading this right?" And so, to bring that out in a way with others actually will calm your system down, and then hopefully you can take some of those negative emotions and look for ways to how do we move them into more of the positive emotions and use them as a motivator to create change or move forward. That was hack number 1. Hack number 2, she talked about changing up your environment, your immediate external environment. We don't have a lot of control over a lot of things, but we do have control over our space. And so she talked about even as simple as changing up your office space where you work, move around, go to a conference room within your facilities, your organizations, or maybe go out to a different coffee shop or go out to lunch in a different way with a different group of people than you normally go out with. Whatever it is, it's kind of think about how you could change something up to create some different energy. Hack number 3, she talked about anchoring to your values. What do you really care about? What are you most interested in? And she talked about how it's important to kind of ground back to that true essence, that true self, and really being really clear on what's most important, what do you care about? And through that, you can actually start to calm your system down. I'm reading rereading William Urey's book, The Power of a Positive No. And he talks about it's a great book, by the way. He talks about it's a yes, no, yes framework. And that first yes is how do you get real clear on what's most important to you? What are your interests? What is it that you care about? And by being grounded on that, you're able to confidently set the boundaries through the no part by being real clear on on what's important to you, that your values. And I think it's a great application in that sense of being calm to be able to present and be confident around expressing what you are not willing to do. Number 4, shift your perspective. Look at it through another perspective. Look at the situation through maybe the customer's perspective or through another department's lens. Whatever it is, to be able to zoom back, take a high level view, and say, what's really going on? How do I look at this thing differently? And then hack number 5, practice presence, mindfulness. We all know it. She talked about just as the simple practice of breathing in and then breathing out with a longer sort of out breath will actually calm down your system. And so great ideas. That's called applied neuroscience that we can put to use. And so it goes with all of our leadership journeys out there. I'm Tom Athenauer with the StarQuest Group, and our mission here is to help leaders from all walks of life create more effective and more healthier and more productive work environments. If you've enjoyed this podcast, click on the like button or subscribe or whatever you do to stay connected with all of us. And last but not least, remember it does matter how you show up each and every day. And so my challenge to all of you is to go out and lead with courage, authenticity, and humility. See you next time.